Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So, taking another fun and exciting episode for you guys this Friday because over the last month or so, pretty much everyone has asked me in the comments whether or not I'm going to review a Saroo cart for the Sega Saturn, because you all know I absolutely love the Saturn. And I told everyone as soon as it arrives from China, I would be doing just that. And if you can't tell already, it's in front of my camera on my table, and that means the package has arrived. Now, this technically isn't an optical disc emulator in the way you think, but it's doing the same thing, so if I refer to it as an ODE in the video, that's slightly incorrect, but it's easy on my voiceover. But honestly, this solves a problem for the Sega Saturn, mostly that if you don't want to run CDRs or buy very expensive discs, this can be a very good option. It's not like there's not other options on the market as well, but this one's coming in at a price point that is extremely cheap compared to everything else. But the real question is that savings worth dealing with a cartridge like this, or should you invest in something different? And just so you are aware, I purchased this with my own money. It was not given to me, so if you want to support the channel, there's a Patreon link down below as well. But high marks for the amount of made in China stickers the maker put on this box. It is absolutely hilarious and gets a little ridiculous as we move on in. But the good thing about the Saroo cartridge is not just an optical disc emulator or something similar. You're going to see it has the action replay with 8 megabytes of memory, a 1 to 4 megabyte RAM card, as well as that pseudo Saturn Kai built in, and the 8 megabyte memory card function. So this provides more than just a way to play games. If you want to play any of the 4 megabyte RAM cartridge games or the 1 megabyte RAM cartridge games, the Saroo cartridge, or at least the one I'm showing here, is going to allow you to do that. So it's going to be a one cart fits all sort of solution, allowing you to put backup games on that and run them on real Sega Saturn hardware, which is always something awesome because I love using my real hardware, even if I do love Mr. FPGA. But let's take a look at what's inside of this. You'll see here we have the SSHD loader, the Saroo, with another made in China sticker on it. So this basically slots into the cartridge slot on your Sega Saturn, where you would put a RAM expansion or any sort of memory card within there. And I will say again, it's a nice quality product. The mold is good here. This cost me $77, and it also came with a micro SD card loaded with games, which is going to also have a bunch of made in China stickers on it. But just as a heads up, I'm not saying anything definitively here, but if you purchase products like this and they come with SD cards that are loaded with files, I do not plug these into any of my computers. I'm worried about giving my computer the digital clap on this one. I'm not saying there's anything on this micro SD card you wouldn't want near your computer, but an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and this was made in who knows where, because the China portion is not there. But I just love how many made in China stickers they really got on here. Very easy to pop it in, but just like USB-A, you always pick the wrong direction first. But if you popped one micro SD card and you pop them all in. So let's take a look at the overall menu structure of the Saroo and what's coming on this card at least. When you boot it up, you're going to get the Sega Saturn splash screen, and then you will get the licensing screen from Sega in and of itself, and then you get the boot menu with all of these different options. Now in the firmware update, I really wouldn't be playing around with the firmware. A lot of these aftermarket cartridges have very specific firmwares designed for them, so if you find something online and try to flash it, you may end up bricking the device as likely as you are to end up with an updated firmware. But they basically loaded this thing up with as many games as they could. We're going to be testing what's on the card here. I did add a few games as well just to see how the process went, and honestly it's extremely easy, so 10 out of 10 for being able to actually handle adding games to the Saroo cartridge. And this definitely does fill a niche. People want to play real Sega Saturn hardware, they don't want to mod chip their consoles, and they don't want to spend the absolute fortune that some of the Sega Saturn games command on the open market. So being able to add games to your Sega Saturn with a flash cart like this is definitely a nice thing. You're going to see there was 110 games added to this, and as we scroll around you can kind of just see what's here. This is in no way, shape, or form a comprehensive library of the Sega Saturn, and some of the games they put on here don't really make much sense to me, but it is what is on the card. And again, you don't need to purchase this with the card. You can just get the firmware and set it up yourself. I just wanted to see what it was like to purchase one of these. And again, just so many different made in China stickers. I know I keep harping on this. I actually find it very funny. I'll never be confused where the Saroo cartridge was made. But as we actually get into a game here, this is the loading process from start to finish. Let's just pick Elevator Action Returns, an absolutely 10 out of 10 game if you've never played it. And this is what it looks like in real time. Don't mind the flashing. That is just the scalar kind of graphics grabbing the signal here. This is obviously on real Sega Saturn hardware over RGB into a scaler, but this is loading exactly as you would expect, and in some instances you will notice faster loading. But that faster loading can affect some games, keeping them from functioning properly or loading in and of itself. But the other thing is audio is not coming across on any sort of CD format, it's coming across over that cartridge slot. So go ahead and listen to this quality on Elevator Action 2. Tell me what you think about it after the comments. But enjoy. Sounds good to my ears, but we will take another section of a sound sample later on in the video to test that as well. But as far as the performance on the Saroo cartridge, when it is working as intended, something like Elevator Action here, this is just a 10 out of 10. I don't know that I'm playing anything other than my original Japanese imported disc versus running this game off a file via the Saroo in the ROM cartridge slot on my Sega Saturn, and that is high praise. And if you do want to buy a copy of Elevator Action Returns, it is definitely not a cheap game, but it is definitely one of the best games on the Sega Saturn in my opinion. I played through level 3 on this capture. I'm just showing you the first little bits of it, but I had absolutely no issues whatsoever. The game loaded, all the audio came through, everything worked like I was playing an original Sega Saturn disc. So as far as Elevator Action Returns is concerned, 100% fully functional. But what you're going to find with the Saroo is some games are going to have slight issues, and I'll show you one of those in a moment. But the first thing I actually want to do is tear the cartridge down and actually talk about the technology inside, and depending on what vendor you buy from, what sort of parts you're actually getting. But if you're just here for Elevator Action Returns, it does work perfectly. Now if we take this cartridge apart in the back, the one I purchased was $10 more, and that's because it's listed as using all new parts. There's other Saroos on the market that are listed as using recycled chip pulls. Now that is not necessarily a bad thing. There's a big industry in China of getting in PCBs, removing working chips, and then adding them back onto PCBs in the future for new products. They will tell you whether or not, at least in the maker, in this instance example, whether or not those are recycled parts or brand new parts. If you want to save $10, you could totally go for the recycled. I just wanted to see what the board looked like with new parts. So you'll see here we have a small Samsung RAM chip, we have that Altera FPGA chip, and we have an ARM chip on board as well. This is a very well designed PCB, which unfortunately has one large omission that is going to be a problem in the future if you plug this thing in and unplug it a ton of times. The PCB is not beveled at the cart connector edge. This should be beveled. It should kind of look like a V shape. That way when you insert and remove the cartridge multiple times, it can't stress the pins in the cartridge slot out. If you take a look at any original Sega Genesis cartridge, Sega Saturn RAM cartridge, you're going to see a beveled edge. So if you are going to use this, definitely do something like set it and forget it. Don't remove this thing 100 times. And if you have any sort of read issues, you may need to back the cartridge out ever so slightly. That is not just a Saroo thing, that's a RAM and ROM cartridge on original Sega Saturn hardware thing as well. The cartridge slot can be incredibly touchy. But let's take a look at something like FMV loading here, because I've heard some instances in some games of FMV stuttering or freezing because of the increased speed. Now you can go into the Saroo within the actual file structure and adjust the loading times for certain games. If you want to see that, maybe I'll do a part 2 on this video, but there's so many different articles out there on how to do it, I would be retreading territory. But at least for the manufacturer of the Saroo I purchased, every single FMV that I have played has worked perfectly fine. I've had no issues with it whatsoever. I will leave a link if I can, sometimes YouTube gets mad about them, in the comments below to the maker I purchased this from. That way you know where you're getting it from. I don't make any money off that whatsoever, but it's one of those things, if you go on AliExpress, there's probably like 50 different makers of this board. I just took a recommendation from somebody I trusted who already purchased it when I decided to make my buying decision. But if you do want to pick up a Saroo cartridge, definitely do your research because you want to make sure the vendor you're dealing with has a good track record and is selling good versions of this. Because when you go on AliExpress, you really are running the gambit of things that are 10 out of 10 good from 1 out of 10 absolutely disastrous. Not that there's any out there that are going to damage your Sega Saturn, it just seems like some cartridges have a better time loading games. As we play Panzer Dragoon here again, I would have no idea that I wasn't just playing my original disc that I put into my Sega Saturn. As far as all of the games on the actual SD card are concerned, I was only able to find one that did not load for me, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But do be aware, the Saroo is not 100% compatible with the Sega Saturn library. The compatibility is extremely high, but if you're trying to play one game in particular and you don't see it in this video, definitely Google to see if it works before you spend your money, because you may find out that the one game you absolutely wanted to play might be one of the games that's not currently compatible with the Saroo cartridge in and of itself, so definitely do your research on that one. But as far as Panzer Dragoon is concerned, the music was great, the FMVs played perfectly fine with no hitching or freezing or stuttering whatsoever, and I did get a little bit faster loading, I feel like, than real hardware. Now moving over to something like X-Men vs Street Fighter, this game uses the RAM expansion card, so now with the Saroo cartridge we're using both the Optical Disc Emulator, for lack of a better term, as well as the 4MB RAM expansion in conjunction, and again this is just running exactly like you would think. You're also getting a little bit faster load times in between matches, although this game didn't really have that long of loads to begin with, so honestly it doesn't really seem to affect anything that much positively. Maybe you save a second or two here and there. But the takeaway is I really wanted to test a game that was using both the cartridge loading for the game in and of itself, as well as the 4MB RAM expansion, to make sure that they were working correctly in conjunction. So as far as X-Men vs Street Fighter is concerned, that's exactly what I found. Again, if I put my original disc in and played, I would expect to have a one-to-one experience with what I'm getting here on the Saroo. So if this is the game you're waiting for, if you want to really play some 4MB RAM expansion games without owning the disc, this is going to be another awesome option for you. And even the load in there where the background does change up, that worked perfectly fine. So as far as this one, just like Elevator Action Returns and Panzer Dragoon is concerned, 10 out of 10, no issues, would play again. But let's move over to one game that definitely has issues. You're going to be able to tell pretty quickly. Street Fighter 03. I'm going to do this in real time. You're going to see the game is starting to boot. You're going to get the splash screen, and then we're going to jump into the actual attract mode. You're going to see some weirdness right after this FMV stops playing. Look for visual glitches. Look for graphics that aren't supposed to be where they are presenting themselves. This seems to be very sensitive to the load speed times. I tried to adjust them and I was never able to get this game to properly boot. You'll see there's a line under Capcom, shouldn't be there, and we're already getting graphical corruption in the attract screen. So it seems like this game does not like to boot, at least on the Saroo I have, and you're going to see in just a moment this is going to freeze up completely. The only way I was able to get past it was to reset my Sega Saturn. But good news is Symphony of the Night works. You have both the option for the internal system RAM as well as the RAM cartridge, and this game does use a different format of audio, so listen to the quality on the Saroo, tell me what you think, and I'll be right back. Again, sounds good to my ears, but leave me a comment and tell me if that sounded in any way, shape, or form off to you. But there's so many fun ways to play Castlevania Symphony of the Night, including the newest translation that includes the 4MB RAM expansion. That's not what's on the SD card here, so I'm not testing that, but I did check in the background and it does 100% work. So again, this is another title, at least from where I played, I really wouldn't be able to tell any difference between this and putting my original Sega Saturn disc in. And that's kind of the takeaway for Saroo here right now, what I'm finding is pretty much almost everything seems to just work totally fine, outside of a few outlier cases where it just will not load up whatsoever. I don't have a capture here, but Daytona USA did the same thing. It just did not want to load for me. It kept freezing. But let's take a look at Radiant Silvergun here, because I just wanted to play this game. It's been a few months since I tested it on the Mr. FPGA core, and again, as I was playing, you'd have no idea whether or not I was using the original disc or the Saroo. So when this thing is working correctly, it is basically invisible. But let's do a pros and cons list about the Saroo in and of itself, so you can decide if you want to pick one up. And if you already own one, leave me a comment down below and tell me how you found yours to be. On the pros list, you definitely have to say the price. This is a cheap product. It's much cheaper than any other option as far as optical disc emulators are out there on the market. So if you're looking for an economical way to load Sega Saturn games without having the original discs, this is definitely one of them. Also on the pros list, it's very easy to use. You just pop it in the cart slot, and once you actually get the connection correct, you power it on, the menu comes up, the games boot quickly, and everything just works. Now let's move over to the cons. Number one, at least on this one, the non-beveled edge is not a good thing. I will definitely in my spare time grab my files and actually grind down the PCB carefully in the background so I know it cannot harm my Sega Saturn. Also on the cons list, there's a few games that I want to play that I just can't get to load, so maybe we'll get a firmware update for that in the future and they will start working. But definitely on the cons list is there is no 100% compatibility. I know I have two pros and two cons, but honestly for $70, what this thing offers to you, if a few games do not work, it seems to be a very awesome compromise. So at least on this Saroo from this maker, this is just something I can recommend. And just so you know, even if I'm not the hugest channel out there, I do not purchase these items with my channel name. I actually use my wife's name. That way no one could send me anything that was from a good batch of their manufacturing process. But yeah, that's the Saroo cartridge. It does exactly what it says on the box, at least in this instance, and the small incompatibilities are known to the community, so it's not like it's really a surprise here. I wish they beveled that cart edge, but otherwise this is like an 8.5 out of 10, and with some firmware upgrades it could definitely become a 9.5 out of 10. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, but we are done and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.